So Huckabee's kind of pressured the Rand Pauls of the world to jump in like full force, which Rand has now done, and that's led him to go around and say stupid things, insulting veterans about Social Security and others, because they're one of the first acts of this Republican Congress, who said they care about elderly people who voted for them, was to try and say that that Social Security needs to be reformed, or they're not going to give out disability payments under Social Security, which, by the way, includes a lot of veterans who they claim to always like.
And reform means cut, as we know. And you know, and Rand Paul not only insulted that, I mean, to get specific, he basically said a lot of people who have supposed disabilities, they have a sore back, or they have like a bad, you know, it's an emotional issue. I mean, that was literally what he said. And I think it's just fascinating because, you know, there's nothing better, particularly with and we'll get to it because it actually looks like the Democrats might finally be pricking up and figuring things out a little bit. But nothing historically is better for damaging the Republican Party than giving the country undivided attention to the Republican Party.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. I just want the more of these guys to talk, to have their clown car debates. There may be 30 of them this time, for all we know, all going at each other like lions in a Roman arena, just tearing each other apart. And you know, there really isn't much more than a dime's worth of difference between any of them. I mean, they're all right-wing kooks, and there's just different levels of right-wing kookdom. But they're not, as I said, not vastly different levels. None of them, between all of them, have an economic plan that can work and do anything for this country. None of them, between all of them, have a health care plan that can do anything to help this country. None of them, between all of them, have an education plan to help this country. There's really just different levels of how much they hate different groups of people. That's the only thing that differentiates them.
Let me say this too. I mean, and then I want to actually ask you a more kind of substantive point about this. But I just want to say, like, does anybody doubt? You know, Rand Paul rightly gets a lot of flack for opposing the Civil Rights Act, and absolutely correctly. And he whines about it. And now he denies that he ever said it, but you know, it's like literally on tape. He opposed the Civil Rights Act. Does anybody doubt that any of these candidates, the Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, maybe even Ben Carson, does anybody doubt that if they were in politics, the political equivalents of themselves in the 1960s, that any of them would have voted for the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act? None of them would. None of them.
Not.
It's not just Rand Paul.
Nor Medicare, nor Medicaid, nor Social Security, none of them.
Well, and that's the stuff they're upfront about. I'm saying even with civil rights, which they would all kind of say, oh, well, of course I would support that.
Right, they have to pretend that they're...
Of course they wouldn't.
Yeah. No, I really think, you know, my guess would be virtually none of them. If Jeb Bush or Mitt Romney had stayed true to the lineage of their families in the Republican Party, I'm talking going back to Prescott Bush, I'm talking George Romney, who were actual moderates, and George Romney, who was a supporter of civil rights, maybe, but you know, but only if they could get away with it. They've betrayed that legacy. So the men they are today, if they were just to suddenly go back in time, no, they couldn't, because they, you know, and so I mean. Yeah, you've got all that. The one thing I wanted to say before we change any topic or even move on at all is when you brought up that comment by Rand Paul about the sore back and, I mean, saying such obnoxious things and ridiculing people. And people need to always remember one thing with this guy, with what a dishonest huckster he is. Because when he was an ophthalmologist, he took patients on Medicare. Okay?
Right.
The guy who's principally against Medicare and doesn't think it, you know, because the government's too big. And when asked why he did it, he said, well, doctors have the right to make a decent living, too.
I have a right to make a good living and respect the Constitution.
So he has the right to make a good living.
If you're
disabled... If you're disabled, you don't have the right to make a good living.
Right.
You don't have the right to do okay. Apparently, you should be mocked. Right. If you're African American, you don't have the right to have him support you in the Civil Rights Act. Of course, now he's claiming he would have, but we know for years he claimed quite publicly he wouldn't have, because that was just going too far and taking the personal rights away, and the government's doing too much. When the government's doing too much, however, in his view, to give people Medicare, which he gets wealthy off of, that's totally different. He has the right to a good living, so that's totally different, right? Yeah.